choice advocates get a strong supporter at a Capitol rally, but some key state leaders did not show up. How changes at the legislature are affecting the chances this session for school choice.
We believe that charter schools are hurting public schools.
A Texas teachers organization wants lawmakers to take a timeout on charter schools, and it's bringing a big backlash.
What they're asking for is to look those parents in the eye and say, no, you can't put your kid in a school that you think is going to be a better fit for them.
We'll dive into a debate that's dividing charter school supporters and Texas teachers. Hello, and thank you for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. Crowds of school choice advocates rallied outside the Capitol this week, sporting their bright yellow scarves to draw attention to their cause. The big rally traditionally gets a lot of attention from state leaders. Senator Ted Cruz and Land Commissioner George P. Bush made their presence known at the rally, but this year was a little different. Neither Governor Greg Abbott nor Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick attended the event, and new House Speaker Dennis Bonnen came out against using public dollars for private or homeschools.
No.
Real quick.
Yeah.
I'm not going to force my positions on the House, but it is very clear there are nowhere near the votes in this House for vouchers.
Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Patrick have supported those measures in the past. But now state leaders and lawmakers seem to be focused on school finance instead of school choice. And as Wes Rappaport shows us, that has some advocates worried they'll be left out.
What do we want? And when do we want it?
Parents need to decide what is best for their kids, and some kids will learn better at home, maybe online.
Houston mother Alicia Giordano, a former teacher, has 3 kids, one in public school, one in private school, and one in charter school.
You can't expect every school to be able to meet every child's needs.
A parent with a child with a disability who can't afford a private option shouldn't be locked into a school that can't help them.
This session, the closest thing so far to school choice legislation is a bill that would grease the wheels for more online courses offered by public and charter schools. But lawmakers in both parties are hesitant about school choice and charter school funding.
Not only are they able to cherry pick which students they want to educate, they're actually pulling some of our best and brightest educators and teachers as well.
We need to make sure we spend the money wisely that we receive from taxpayers to educate our children in the best way possible.
Lubbock Republican John Frullo doesn't want public dollars used for private education.
I'm not for sending money to organizations that are unaccountable in the way that schools are.
Every child learns differently, and if we can put them in the right educational fit, they're going to become lovers of learning, and they're going to thrive in school.
I'm Wes Rappaport for State of Texas.
Charter schools are a big part of the school choice debate, but this week the Texas American Federation of Teachers called on state lawmakers to put a moratorium on new charter schools. We want to get different perspectives on this proposal. Joining us now is Starley Coleman from the Texas Charter School Association and Ray McMurray from the Texas American Federation of Teachers. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
You bet, it's an honor.
So Ray, first off, we want to know why call for a moratorium?
Well, we believe this is perfectly timed. I mean, I will tell you first, again, thanks for having us here. This is a really important issue. And Texas AFT proudly advocates for all of our Texas public school children. And especially as a former classroom teacher, for 18 years, I went to work as a teacher and a coach. And so I know what it's like to work in the schools and defend kids every day. Right now, we are calling for a timeout on the expansion of charter schools. We're not saying ban charter schools. We're saying moving forward, let's take a moratorium. Let's take a step back. Let's look at really the impact. Let's understand and investigate what the impact is. And we believe that charter schools are hurting public schools. And that is evident through several factors. But really, what I look at as a former economics teacher is this idea of opportunity cost. The opportunity to do one thing cost us over here. So the opportunity to continue down a road of preferential funding for charter schools, where only 6% of the kids are, what is the cost to where the overwhelming 95% of our kids are in our real public schools, our authentic public schools?
Well, Starley, why is it a bad idea to have a timeout on opening new schools?
Yeah, it's a great question. So here's the truth of the matter. There are 140,000 kids on charter school waiting lists across the state right now. And so what they're asking for is to look those parents in the eye and say, no, You can't put your kid in a school that you think is going to be a better fit for them. And when we talk about educational opportunity and opportunity costs, let's talk about what's happening at charter schools. Right now, charter schools represent, as Ray said, about 6% of the kids statewide. The kids that come to charter schools are overwhelmingly from low-income backgrounds and racial minority backgrounds. And when you look at the outcomes of how those kids are doing, 20% more of our kids at charter schools that come from low-income backgrounds are enrolling in four-year colleges than coming from traditional district schools. And when you think about who's preparing the future workforce of Texas, that is coming from charter schools. Now let's talk about the funding question. Our friends at the AFT are really only explaining one side of the equation. Now, as a former economics teacher, you know this better than anyone. There's, you can only do math in one way, and that's to add all of the pieces of the equation together. Charter schools do get more money from the state than ISD schools do. That's an absolute fact and an absolute truth. And the reason why is because it's the only funding source that we have. ISD schools get money from the state and local property taxpayers. Charter schools don't get any of that money.
How do teachers factor into all of that? We've talked about the funding mechanism, but surely this is something that your group talks about a lot.
Well, teachers are obviously very concerned about all the factors. On the funding, we want equal funding. We're talking about state funding. So the legislature in session right now only has control over the state budget, and we don't think it's fair that they disproportionately and have a skewed funding formula that favors and prefers charter schools. It ought to be the same. Right now, taxpayers, I think, would be shocked if they knew that under the current state funding formula, charters are getting $882 million a year. That's almost $1 billion a year more for, they're only 6% of the enrollment, but yet they're getting almost 17% of the state funding in this budget. What they do is cherry pick on the front end, they selectively remove on the back end, where they skew their data. And the reality is that when it comes to special education, when it comes to English language learners, they're underrepresented. They're not represented. And so if what she's saying, if she believes what she's saying, let's take a time out. Let's just look, really, why not scrutinize the data? Public education is too important when the funding is skewed, when there's no democratically elected school board, and when you have real differences in data around how kids are being represented.
Let's talk about data. TEA says that charter schools educate 65% of their student population are economically disadvantaged. District schools have 58%. You're a former economics teacher, you can do the math there. Limited English proficiency, we have 19% of the student body at charter schools. They have 9%. We absolutely are educating some of the most challenged kids that are coming into public schools today, and we are doing an excellent job with both of those types of students. Now, there is nothing more democratic than a charter school setting where parents have to actively choose to put their children in this environment. Parents know what kind of learning environment is going to be best for their children. And we have an obligation to create a public education system that has a place for every child. It is up to us as the grown-ups in the room and taxpayers and policy setters in this state to make sure that we are responsive to what children need.
We'll have to leave it there, guys. I really appreciate you being here. Clearly, this is going to be a conversation throughout the session because we all know education and school finance that's the topic this session.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for having us. We really appreciate it.
We're getting more insight into the challenge of paying for public schools.
Property taxes are going up 8 or 9%. Sales taxes grow at 4%. Our money comes from sales tax. We can't grow, we can't keep up.
Hear what one state leader is saying about the difficult balance facing Texas lawmakers. A girl killed in a house explosion. Now the tragedy could lead to change. How one lawmaker's focus on safety is leading a charge to add new regulations on natural gas companies. We're getting insight into the challenge for state leaders as they work to get more money for public schools while also giving property tax relief. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick described the difficult balance facing lawmakers.
The more property tax goes up, the state share goes down. It's like a seesaw effect. Now this session, because property taxes are going up so high, we're getting all this money poured into the state. We're plowing that back into education. That has not always been done. But the reason the local percentages are up is because property taxes are going up 8 or 9%. Sales taxes grow at 4%. Our money comes from sales tax. We can't grow, we can't keep up. We can't keep up. So until we equalize this, which we're going to try and do, bring the property taxes down, and then where we can find funding, put more funding into education, we can equalize that. But if property taxes continue to go up 8 or 9%, and our state revenues go up 4% a year, that's all we have. Our budget, real quick, if you look at a budget clock behind my head, imagine that's a clock behind my head, from midnight to a little past 6 is what we spend on education. 52% of our budget is education. The total education budget for Texas is $60 billion a year, but 52%. 31% is health care. So from 7 to 10 o'clock is health care. And from 10 to 11 is public safety, 11%. 94% of our whole budget, 3 items. We're not hiding money under the pillow. Whether you're saying, well, gee, we need more money for health, or we need more money for law enforcement, or this is what I have. And by law, by the Constitution, we can only spend what we have. And unless you have an income tax, which no one is going to support and no one wants, unless you're going to increase the sales tax, which no one supports and no one wants, a few people may, we only have what we have.
Patrick is right. The state is spending more money on schools, but that's not keeping up with the rising cost of public education in Texas. And your property taxes are filling the gap. For perspective, in 2008, local property owners and the state each covered about 45% of the cost of public education. This year, local property taxes will cover more than 55% of the cost, with the state covering just over a third of the share. They're the gatekeepers to state policy. We now know who's leading the top committees in the Texas House, and there are some surprises.
Whenever there's a new speaker, there's always going to be some changes. And clearly, I think, some people are going to be disappointed.
How the new assignments could determine what gets through the legislature and what fails. We'll go in depth with our roundtable next on State of Texas. We now have a better understanding of what likely will and won't pass the Texas legislature. Speaker Dennis Bonnen named the House committee chairs. They're the gatekeepers to state policy. For example, the Calendars Committee determines when bills reach the full House for consideration, or if they get there at all. Amarillo Republican For Price will lead that powerful committee. Eagle Pass Democrat Pancho Navarez will lead the Homeland Security and Public Safety Committee. That makes the chances for constitutional carry slim. In the past, he's opposed that idea, getting rid of the license requirements to carry handguns in public. Then there's the Public Education Committee, chaired by Houston Republican Dan Huberty. That committee is stacked with public education supporters, so forms of school choice bills will likely not pass, especially those that dedicate public dollars to private or homeschools. For perspective, we turn to our roundtable. Madeline Meckelberg is the Austin Bureau reporter for the El Paso Times. James Berrigan covers politics for the Dallas Morning News, and Matthew Watkins is the breaking news editor for the Texas Tribune. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
So we got committee assignments this week from Speaker Bonnen in the House. Anything surprise you?
I think it was certainly some level of surprise to see Representative Joe Moody of El Paso get placed as Speaker Pro Tem for the chamber. He's been a really big criminal justice advocate, and he was chair of the Criminal Jurisprudence Committee, so I think a lot of people were thinking he was hoping to get that post back, but he seems excited about his new leadership position, but he still will keep a spot on that committee, so that was surprising from the El Paso's perspective, certainly.
Yeah, I thought the speaker struck a pretty good bipartisan tone. He retained a lot of Republican members to important chairmanships, but also spread the love to some Democrats. Speaker Pro Tem Joe Moody from El Paso, Chris Turner, who's the Democratic caucus leader, actually got a chairmanship, which was a bit surprising, but I think Speaker Bonnen's really trying to send the message that he's trying to work in a bipartisan fashion, and I think it sent the message. I think people were pretty happy.
I think some people in the Capitol were a little surprised that Todd Hunter lost his chairmanship.
Yeah, I think whenever there's a new speaker, there's always going to be some changes. And clearly, I think, some people are going to be disappointed. Sarah Davis, another representative who lost a chairmanship. But yeah, I think what you said is right, that he really seems to be trying to kind of get each kind of faction of the House something to keep them happy early on in this session. He seems really devoted to kind of keeping unity, at least for now. Of course, it's easier to do that when the bills aren't being voted on and the real discussions, debates haven't started yet.
And a lot of new blood, too. A lot of new chairmen that we hadn't seen, people who had been in the House for several sessions and hadn't got a leadership position, and now they're in one.
Right, and the timing of the announcements of the committee chairs, too, is significant. You know, usually that doesn't come until at least February, and that, I think, signals that we're probably going to see the House try and take charge on some issues and lead on some issues, and they certainly want to match the pace of the Senate, which already came out with their announcements.
Got committee hearings for next week already.
Right.
Yeah, speaking of the Senate, the big news out of that chamber this week was Senator Kel Seliger, you know, making what the Lieutenant Governor has called a rude comment about one of his staffers. Can you tell me how that really played out, James?
Yeah, so Kel Seliger is a longtime senator. I think he's been there since 2004 from a rural area in West Texas. And he was previously the higher ed chairman. He's gone the opposite way than Lieutenant Governor Patrick has wanted him to in the past, voted against things like school vouchers. And this time around, he got that chairmanship from the higher ed committee taken away from him. He was put as chairman of the agricultural committee, but then there were some comments on a radio show where he thought that was sort of political retribution. He made what Lieutenant Governor Patrick said was a lewd comment about his staffer.
He called it corrosive, his behavior in the Senate, right?
Yeah, so people thought, Lieutenant Governor Patrick said that he took away the chairmanship. Then there was a whole thing about his behavior other than that comment, and Governor Patrick said, you know, he's had other behavioral issues, mentioned a couple of comments that we weren't able to confirm with other senators, and said he's lost the trust of some of the senators in here. And so it really turned into a big sort of scandal thing, and it's ended up with Senator Seliger no longer having a chairmanship.
Yeah, a lot of people have been talking about Patrick needs, you know, Republicans on his side, obviously, you know, not having him in the chairmanship and you know, the makeup of the Senate right now, it kind of shifts the dynamic a little bit.
Sure, you know, a lot of people have been talking about Seliger being kind of a free agent now. You know, Dan Patrick has always kind of presided over the Senate with a strong hand and, you know, tried to keep lawmakers in line. Seliger has kind of lost the reason that he doesn't really owe Patrick anything anymore. And so a lot of people have wondered, will that affect things when he needs Kel Seliger's vote to bring things up to the House floor? Right now, a party line vote, the Republicans have the numbers to bring a bill up, but if Seliger separates, then it could get more challenging.
I'm also interested to see what impact this has on, you know, the dynamic overall, because the leaders of the, you know, the governor, the Speaker Bonin, and Lieutenant Governor Patrick kind of came out at the beginning and they were like, we're unified, like we're doing stuff this session, we're going to get things done. And I wonder what impact this has, because last session it was the dispute between the Senate and the House, and now there's a lot more internal stuff going on in the Senate. How does that impact this goal of unity and this goal of productivity this session?
One other thing about Senator Seliger is that he's been there since 2004. He's a rural Republican. He marches to the beat of his own drum, and he's got a record for, you know, bipartisanship. He's buddies with Senator Kirk Watson of Austin, a Democrat, and people are comparing his sort of maverick behavior to sort of how John McCain was on a national level, where he bucked the trend often. And so we'll see if there's a sort of thumbs down on a health care vote kind of moment this session with Senator Seliger.
All right. Thank you for being with us, guys.
Thank you.
An explosion destroys a family's home. A 12-year-old girl killed inside. But the tragedy could spark change. How one lawmaker is leading a charge to give you new ways to protect your family.
A deadly explosion leads one lawmaker to file a series of bills that aims to increase oversight of natural gas companies in Texas. Dallas Representative Rafael Anchia filed the bills after a 12-year-old girl died last year in a house explosion linked to a gas leak. He spoke to Wes Rappaport about the bills.
So the bills fall into two buckets. All right, we filed them this week, and one group of the bills deals with the Railroad Commission as an effective regulator. And the second group of bills deals with operators of natural gas pipelines to reduce the risk of explosions like the one that happened in my district that killed a little 12-year-old girl, so that they don't happen again. This little girl's death could have been prevented. Regrettably, there were two explosions before her death that either went underreported or unreported to the authorities. There were no independent investigators on site. The reality is that if we have immediate action on the part of the regulator or the gas company, lives can be saved, and that's what these bills seek to do.
And it's not just happening in your district, right? I mean, there have been explosions in Central Texas, you know, house explosions. What is your message for our statewide audience about the fact that this really could happen anywhere?
My message to the audience is that in 2019, in a wealthy state like Texas, we can and should do better. We need to have a regulatory regime that is going to reduce the risk of these explosions happening. We need to replace rusted, corroded, or faulty pipes in the state of Texas and make sure our infrastructure is at 21st century standards. And in order to do that, these bills will help us increase the transparency and the enforcement mechanisms that we need to ensure that that will occur.
What roadblocks do you see getting this to happen? Because no doubt there will be a roadblock or two, right?
Well, look, there's some very powerful forces that are going to seek to kill these bills, right? Already I've got lobbyists coming to my office telling me what a bad idea some of these bills are. The reality is that our door is open. We want to work with stakeholders across the board to make sure we come up with good public policy that reduces the risk of these leaks and accidents ever happening again. And we open our door to everyone.
A key part of Anchia's legislation would require gas companies to report leaks to the public in real time with an interactive, searchable map. Thank you again for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. We'll be back next week to bring you an in-depth look at Texas politics.